All right, so shall we get things started?
Yep.
Excellent. All right, well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of the Technorama Tuesdays webinar series. Tonight we're talking about the Internet of Things. My name is Hannah Murray, and I'm the Student Services and Compliance Officer at the Community Media Training Organisation. And I'll be on hand to assist in asking your questions throughout the session to our panel and making sure that the session generally runs smoothly. Before we get into tonight's webinar, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we are recording, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I acknowledge that their sovereignty was never ceded. So, what exactly does the Internet of Things refer to? The Internet of Things is the concept of connecting any device with an on or off switch to the internet and/or to each other. This includes everything from mobile phones, smart speakers, fridges, coffee makers, washing machines, headphones, lamps, basically anything you can poke a stick at. So where might the Internet of Things take radio? And where might radio take the Internet of Things? We're already running intelligent devices which talk to each other over LANs and comms links. You might already be an IoT island without ever having called it that. So we're going to talk about the state of the nation, what others are doing, and what you might do in an Internet of Things enabled environment. Here to speak with us tonight, we have our excellent panel, starting with our Capitan, John Maizels, the President of Technorama Australia. Give him a wave. We've got Craig McCosker, the Product Strategy Manager for Future Focus. Frank Wilcox, the Station Engineer at Southern Cross Austereo in Mount Gambier, also on the Technorama board. And of course, Johan Lee, the Operations Manager at Sin Media in Melbourne. So without any further ado, over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Well, so firstly, commiserations to anybody who didn't or both vow and declare in the Cup. And I am really interested to know, and I'm hoping to find this out on ABC News later, what happened to all those people who are running office sweeps where the money for second and third was distributed before the protest was sorted out. I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the internet, which is sort of everybody. Now, in radio, we've been using the internet for yonks, and we've had connected devices for yonks without ever thinking about it. Before IP, before the internet, we routinely connected devices together using bits of wire, the so-called general purpose interface or GPI contact closure way of doing things. And even when I was a young boy, I was 17, controlling transmitters at 3XY in Melbourne, there was an automation system using relays and uniselectors and wires and buzz and clunk, and it really did. And a telephone dial to enter the data that you wanted the transmitter to do. If you wanted to switch between the two transmitters, you dial 002. And I did that by accident one night, and the transmitter switched, and it switched while the announcer was talking, and nobody thanked me. These days, devices are much more autonomous, and we can set them up to make decisions on their own behalf, or according to a set of rules, or indeed, as we move into artificial intelligence, according to things that they've learned about the environment. And how scary is that? Well, we don't really know. Like, who knows where this is going? What I can tell you right now is that at least one source says there are 12 billion devices connected to the internet right now. I find that to be a very large number because the owners of Java still proclaim that there are only 3 billion devices that are running Java. And I would contend that a very large number of the devices connected to the internet probably are running Java. So, all right, somewhere between 3 billion and 12 billion. In your radio stations, I imagine, unless it's a very, very simple radio station right now, you'd be able to run around and find 20 things with IP addresses that are connected to a LAN right now, either to one LAN or several LANs. and many of those things are talking to each other. And as soon as you move into the world of digital studios and digital consoles, that number increases. And indeed, just moving into a house recently, we found that there are 20 devices on our LAN before we'd even really finished moving in, and like 6 of those devices were at the TV set. So we have the Internet of Things environment, and our job tonight is to talk about some of those things and where they're going. And the panel is very broadly experienced, and in fact we are very broadly inexperienced because, of course, nobody can know everything about this topic. So introducing the people who are there, we have a broadcast engineer, wave Frank. We have the sort of systems administrator and budding technologist, you can wave Johan. And we have the person who describes himself as not really a technologist or broadcaster at all, but has been responsible for one of the biggest rollouts of an interactive app in the country, and something that I tried a little bit earlier, and that's the ABC's news bot. And hello, Craig.
Hello.
Excellent. So our job here today is to toss around a whole lot of things and talk and riff amongst ourselves. And we have a small audience which is so slowly increasing. It's really rather spooky when there are more of us than there are of you. But fortunately, that is being fixed. If you would like to ask a question, just let us know. Wave your hand via the chat window, and Hannah will sort of jump in, and we can open microphones and you can join the conversation, and that's all part of what we're doing tonight, because this is, you know, as informal as we can make it. So in the notice I sent out earlier, I said, well, you know, we're talking about transmitters that can make phone calls, studios that can send you an email, news reports that sort of use Messenger to go ping, and on-air lights that can be turned on and off by an IP message. These are all examples of things that might be thought of as Internet of Things. So, Frank, why don't we start with you? And Frank, you have a foot in 2 different camps. One is the community radio camp, and the other one, of course, is, as having been a serial offender as a chief engineer in commercial radio, you have a foot in the commercial camp. So maybe we'll just ask the question without notice. Where is the commercial radio side going at the moment with Internet of Things? Is this something that's being embraced, or is it still out there so that they're no further advanced or behind where community radio people are?
At the moment, it seems to be no further advanced than community radio. Having said that, it depends what you call the Internet of Things. For example, Southern Cross Austereo, the company I work for, uses Axia. Now, Axia uses boxes that talk to each other over the internet. So effectively, they are using Internet of Things. They will turn GPIO's general purpose interfaces off and on. They will tell programs to start and stop at various times. We also use things at transmitter sites that will send us emails. It says, oh, your transmitter's stopped. We've changed over to the other transmitter because we're clever enough, and we're sending you an email to tell you that. We also have things at the studios and the transmitters that say, your generator's just started because the mains power has gone away and might be back one of these days, but we've started the generator. So that wakes me up at 3 o'clock in the morning to say, wake up, Frank, the generator's on, and I look at it and go back to sleep because I'm waiting for the generator to turn off. They're all examples of Internet of Things. But I believe it can be so much more than that, and commercial radio hasn't really embraced that yet.
Why do you think that is?
I think because commercial radio is currently very much trying to make sure that everything they currently have in place works properly. I know that sounds silly, but there are so many variations. For example, we use Zeta as a playout system. It is so much more powerful than what we're using it for currently, and we are still investigating what it can do. And I think that's part of it. We're still investigating to find out what we've currently got can do, let alone adding the extra bits and pieces on, which comes down to individual station techs like myself who will turn around and say, well, hang on, I've got a generator out there. I've got no connection to it except over the mains. Can I interface that and it'll tell me if the generator starts or stops? that sort of thing.
Okay. Johan, you related to me earlier something that you've done at SYN, which I gather was a fairly simple idea that in fact came out of a conversation on the Q&A Facebook group.
Yep. So yeah, I've got a software running on one of our servers, which basically is a silence detector. And it will send me an email once it detects that there is a silence beyond a 10 to 15 second threshold. Again, keeps me up at night, get an email in the middle of the night going, you're off air. And it sends me an email once it's back as well.
So okay, let's just clarify what you said. Is the silence detector itself running on an intelligence device, or is the trigger coming from the console?
The trigger comes from audio over IP. So we use ReadNet here at SYN. And so when it detects silence on one of the channels, it would trigger the software.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then it sends you an email. I mean, how does the email wake you up in the middle of the night?
My phone just goes beep, like every other phone does.
You must be a very light sleeper.
Sometimes, yeah. And yeah, you can actually trigger it because it's completely software-based. You can trigger it to do a lot of things. So after 5 minutes, if it's still silent, it can do something else. It could make a phone call if it was connected to a phone. It could try and start a Windows Media Player as an example. It could start up another software to try and react, to try and repair the issue that's causing the silence.
Using this technique, how much difference has it made to the station?
Honestly, I think it is a little bit difficult to measure because we did not have the capability of actually detecting it previously. So I'm not sure whether it's an improvement. I'm sure it's an improvement that I'm actually aware of what's going on when the studios go off air. But because previously we had no idea when it actually went off air, just the knowledge of it is amazing.
Okay, so before, no logging, at least now you know what your reliability is.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll come back and talk a little bit about, where you might go next. Craig, so I listened yesterday to a really fascinating webinar that you were on discussing the news bot that the ABC has and how that came about. And this is possibly something not a lot of people know about, but you can go and do it. You can search on Newsbot. Don't search on News Space Bot. That seemed not to work for me, but it came back after I searched on Newsbot and said, oh, you mean News Space Bot? And it took me not very long to sign up for it. And now I have the ABC beeping a number of devices in the house telling me that there's news. How did this come about, and what sort of impact has it had on the organisation?
Okay, so yeah, thanks, John. It came about because we're looking to, get our media out to younger audiences, particularly our news. And you could see a trend over years, especially like you saw it with the BlackBerry, but it kept on growing and growing of messaging on mobile, and people just were organising their lives through it. And so it was like, do we have a role to play there? If people are organising their lives there and news is part of their lives, can we be more effective in talking to people with a messaging format? So Facebook launched its bot platform in 2016. Previously, we were working with WhatsApp, but that got quite hard to maintain because it was a one-to-one messaging sort of environment. So there was lots of effort to manage the subscriber lists, and there was sort of no scale to it that, we just have to keep on putting on people. But with Facebook Messenger, we could build an automated system that could handle a lot of it, and people could come and subscribe to it via Facebook, where a lot of people do get their news, and then we could have a more direct relationship with them and an ongoing relationship. So they could subscribe to the information they were interested in, but we could also start exploring more two-way relationships because Messenger is really good for getting feedback from people. In fact, we get so much feedback through it, we can't handle that. So we're trying to work out new systems so that we can be more responsive to people and give them more personalized information. And that means from our journalists, not just on subjects they're interested in and topics like that.
How difficult is Messenger to work with? If you're in a radio station, you go, it'd be really good to have a little app that pushed out what we're playing now to listeners who care. Which would probably be not a very good way to use it. But if you just want to do something pretty simple, is it easy to use, or does it require a whole heap of complexity?
Again, depends what you want to do. There's software out there that you can use, and we're using it where you don't require any coding. Like, we have journalists maintaining the newsbot. The vast majority of it is them crafting that bulletin you get is people. But then we build other services behind it. So we were doing live election results through it, and that took programmers to do, and that's more complicated. But you could get an agency, or the programming is not particularly complicated. But yeah, the fundamentals of our system is based on what was at the time freely available software. That most of the software will have free tiers, and anyone can do it. If you've got a Facebook page, you could set one up.
And most radio stations, I guess, do have Facebook pages, but not all people. And interestingly, a number of our technology community, people who simply refuse to have anything to do with Facebook. Just as an aside, are there other platforms that you investigated and rejected, but which might, appeal to those who don't want to engage with Facebook?
Well, there's Telegram, which isn't as big here, but Telegram has a framework for doing these type of things. The software we used started in Telegram. It was European software, but Telegram's not big here. Then there is a WhatsApp, and WhatsApp now has a bot platform there, which we haven't used yet, but which we do want to explore because the volume of users on WhatsApp is very high. And then there's Signal and a few smaller ones. So if you've got a community who are on a particular messaging platform, it could be Slack as well, you can set up these type of communities, and part of it can be automated, like sending those notifications based on some of the events that you just mentioned. You can use bots are good for that type of thing too, is that instead of getting an email, you get a message into your system. So your automated systems can ping those messages, and that's the same with Microsoft Teams. There's those workflow systems that you can then integrate with multiple sensors or systems that you need to get information from. So you're mixing up messages from hardware with messages from people. So yeah, it depends where your audience is. It's sort of like, and if they're there, things like messaging are a really good platform for keeping in touch with them, keeping a loyalty, and then you can build potentially, when's more complex stuff like your programming. When's this program on? Where has this host gone? You can automate your support systems. If you're getting frequent questions about things, there's no need for a person to be answering them. It's getting easier, and Facebook's made that easier. Not that I've used this part of their system, because we've built it ourselves, to have FAQs and to have those automatically answered if people ask. So we'll be looking at this from across our radio stations and our TV about how we can sort of more automate those support functions so that people get instant responses to their questions. When's Harrow on, and things like that are reasonably easy to automate. And then people aren't waiting. They've got a direct way to find out information. But then you also have channels there to direct it through for, so that a human can answer them as well. So you get the best of both worlds there. It is tricky, the AI side of things. It's not perfect. It's a lot of hard work to train and to get right. But once you've started building something, you get this information from people about exactly what they want from you that you can use to guide how you run your organization.
I did. I had, when I signed up, I did have a couple of what I might have thought of as false starts, and trying to learn the format of commands that I could use. I think I said help, and it didn't quite do what I expected. And then there was something that didn't work, but it came up and said, "Oh, do you want to do this?" And I went, "No." "Do you want to do this?" "No." "Do you want to do this?" "No." He said, "Okay, I'm out of answers," which was a really interesting response. But would you like to give me some feedback? Now, if I'd done it at that point, where does that branch, who does it go to, and how difficult would that have been to code?
Most of that's probably not done in code. That would have been done in a system like Google Dialogflow. And so that's software for managing those conversations. So it recognizes what you say and then tries to map it to something it can do. And there can be, the way people ask things can be quite varied, quite amazingly varied. So you've got to build that up and get that right. So yeah, some of that can be quite fiddly, and that's part of what we're exploring, because we're trying to grapple with it, because there's no doubt it's the future. And it will get easier because these systems are very young. So part of this is just purely the learning experience, and there's going to be fails. It's different from programming because it uses a different model for working out how things work. And so if you change one thing, it can cause something else to break. So it's very fiddly. So this is an experiment, but it's one of those things where we're learning lots about the audience and what they want, and working out new ways to better serve them, to be more to build a deeper relationship.
And is your audience tolerant to mistakes?
Some aren't. They're in and they're out. Oh, this is rubbish. But it's one of our loyalist audiences overall in our surveys. Like, we want people coming back to the ABC every day. We want people to find us that useful. And particularly with this messenger audience, they're the most frequent visitors. And so we can turn that potentially into other things about, telling them about podcasts, or we've done audio. We have done a bit, we've worked with Radio National to do things. So we can do, experiments, because we get them coming back and got that loyalty. They're very open to trying new things for us and giving us feedback. We tried an early news briefing that was done with a particularly young audience in mind. So we put it out to the messenger audience. Hey, can you listen to this for a week and tell us what you think? And you can get a lot of really good in-depth feedback that way. And you can try something out over time instead of just a one-off, and see how it takes, whether it's a novelty or it's something that people will keep on going with.
Okay. So let's talk to somebody who has a very young audience. The whole point of SYN, Student Youth Network, is that it's a young audience. Johan, what have you been doing to connect your infrastructure to the audience to add value to their experience?
I think one of the biggest things is trying to prepare the young audience to prepare them for what is going to come next. So things like making sure that you can actually listen to the radio online through online streams, making sure that our studios are actually up to date with the latest technology, because that is what they will be using in the next generation. Even though some of the stations or the commercial stations have not upgraded to audio over IP, but that's what they're going to be dealing with next. Southern Austereo has gone over to Axia, which is basically audio over IP. And so just prepare them and give them the experience early on, so that when they go out into the commercial world, they have got some experience with it, and they can hit the ground running a little bit faster.
I'm not sure whether you stopped talking there or we just lost the audio.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
I was waiting for an alarm bot to send me an email to say, yeah, it's all right, he stopped talking. Do you at SYN, do you take any of the metadata that you've got available, so track names or playlist or anything else, is that pushed out to the listeners, and is there other stuff that you do in order to appeal to a young audience in their terms?
It is a little bit tricky there, in that we do not keep track of enough information. Again, because we are a small station, and I think this is a problem that a lot of community stations face, is we do not have the resources to keep all these things up to date. Some volunteers would keep it up to date. Some volunteers would make sure that their podcast is up to date and that their playlists are published on the website. Whereas on the other hand, we've got some volunteers who just do not do that. And so it becomes a little bit inconsistent in that area as well. And that's, I think, one of bigger challenges, and not so much that they lack the platform to do it.
For people who aren't aware, what is the age range of your programmers, and what's the age range of your target audience?
Our target audience is predominantly youth, although anybody can listen to the radio. Our presenters are all under the age of 26.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that, by the way, is a feature of sin. You get to 26 and you miraculously turn into an old fart and you're not allowed on air anymore.
Yep.
Frank and I are stuffed.
You speak for yourself.
Frank, what you're sort of following on from what Johan is saying. So technologically, what is Austereo doing to ensure that, well, and 5GTR, because they might be completely different. What are you doing to ensure that you're connecting appropriately to an audience which has suitably enabled devices?
Okay, we do RDS over radio. So if you're listening to radio and you have an RDS receiver, you can see what's playing, and that's on HIT in Mount Gambier and any FM station that Southern Cross Austereo uses. We are also on Facebook very heavily, and also on the websites. So we're trying to keep the audience engaged on social media and also listening live to air.
Mm-hmm. So coming back to the Internet of Things approach, how much of that is done automagically via processes that don't require human intervention? How much of it requires human intervention, and where do you think we could go with that?
RDS doesn't require human intervention. That's automatically done with a couple of apps within the program. So whatever's playing on air, whether we're local or over the network, which is very clever, I must admit, it comes over and says, we're playing Fred Nurk singing Hallelujah. That comes over automatically. On our apps on smartphones or whatever, it also comes over and tells you what has played. It doesn't tell you what's going to play, but it tells you what has played, and you can listen back to it if you want to. Also, the announcers themselves use Facebook fairly substantially to promote their shows and to emphasize what they've done during their shows. I suppose that's the hardest way to do it. Last week, I went around with the HIT guys. We did a Limestone Coast travel. We did a breakfast show from 4 different sites. All that's on Facebook for people to have a look at and enjoy. And they do it very, very well. They cut it up very well. That's the human intervention. Everything else is done automatically.
And so this is done by devices talking to other devices.
Correct. Internet over IT. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned before that you'd come across the intelligent lamps and connection over power lines. I thought that was sort of an interesting thing for us to potentially use, and something that could be easily used in community radio.
I went to electrical wholesalers, and they've got a display there, and it's very, very clever. It's all over normal cabling within your house, or your mains cabling. You can turn lights off and on. You can dim your lights. You can turn them up. You can turn all your lights off. Plus, it interfaces with these very clever Google speakers. So you turn around to the Google speaker and say, turn the lights off, and everything turns off. And that's all done with standard stuff over normal mains wiring. It's very clever.
And this is over the wiring, not over Wi-Fi.
Correct. Not over Wi-Fi, not over Cat6. If you think back to years and years and years ago when we had Tandy stores in Australia, this is back in time, you used to be able to get an intercom and you plug it in, and you plug one in the kitchen, and you could talk to the boss.
And it would modulate over the power wiring.
Yeah. And this is working exactly the same way, but it's Internet of Things over structured cabling.
One of the things that intrigues me about this is that it's using IP messaging, and then the question is, what would it take to hack that to be able to get access to the messages, because it seems that vendors don't spend much time publicizing how to actually talk to the devices. They want you to use their proprietary interfaces, whatever those are, or I guess, these things, the Google speaker device. Anybody want to sort of jump in and say, well, here's where we've been able to hack into the boxes to be able to talk to them?
Before you go any further, there's one thing. If you go to your garage and your automatic garage door opener, how many people hack into that and open your garage door? There's no point in it for most people. For a company is going to turn around and say, we'll put these things behind a firewall.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's just you, Joe Blow, you're not going to do that for your...
Yeah, okay, I see where you're going with that, Frank. So not for nefarious reasons. When I say hack into, the proprietary thing, and we've got some of those here. So I bought a couple of things from Aldi, where they had little PowerPoint controllers. So you plug them in, you register them with a web service. God knows how that works. They don't ask anything about the IP infrastructure I've got here, don't even seem to know what my SSID is, and yet somehow have managed to connect to things, some wonderful, possibly HTTP-based protocol, and then give me the ability to be able to turn things on and off from an app. But I'd actually like to know how to do that with a contact closure from a console. So how do we go about hacking that? That's the question. Has anybody's had any luck with that? And by the way, if you're listening to this and you're participating in the webinar and you've had some experience with that, feel free to pop up your hand and Hannah will alert us to the fact that you want to join the conversation.
There was a weird hack that was reported recently about people hacking the smart speakers with lasers, that they can trick the tiny little microphones in the smart speakers with light. Yeah, and the guys who are doing it, you have to have direct line of sight. It's a really weird sort of thing to do, but they found that the arrays of microphones in the smart speakers will pick up laser light as sound, and so if they modulate the light, they can give commands into it, which is just weird. And they don't even quite understand the physics of it all. So that was a weird one that came up. I don't know of any practice. It's sort of very much the same as what happened when Alexa was first launched, when people, you could stand outside a window and yell and get Alexa to do things. Like potentially that's open the front door if you've got a smart lock connected to your smart speaker to open your door, or you don't have any type of security on that. So that was interesting, but that's a range of things with smart speakers, is that security on those in the home, especially as they're wired into the rest of the home, your locks, your bank account, flight details, whatever, fridge, they become an interesting point. But mostly, that's inside the house, and security will, increase as it needs to.
And by the way, that hack was reported on ABC News. I'm sure it was. In your box?
Not yet. That's a bit too specialised for what we do with technology. But I forget. But that was quite a specialised little article, that one.
Well, so where do we go with security on this? And I remember it was reported with some mirth about, and I think by an ABC radio announcer on one of the podcasts, it might have even been on Richard Feidler's conversation. It was reported, but somebody, an announcer saying on air, "Hey Google, pay the electricity bill," and 5,000 homes have suddenly paid their electricity bills, or something worse.
Yeah, well, they dealt with, because they were trying to do ads in the US too for the devices, and they were triggering the devices. So I think they've both sort of updated their models so that it doesn't get tricked by something coming from a TV. I'm not quite sure how they've done that, but
yeah, I wonder how you'd know.
But the models that they get from those speakers, those speaker arrays, are quite complex, and they're quite smart. So those speakers can hear things that you can't hear. So there's apps that they're building out there which will use the speakers to potentially detect if you're if your fridge has got a problem by listening to the sound of its motor, that not that it's perceptible to you, but they'll put it against AI models of how that fridge motor should be working, and will be able to potentially detect and diagnose problems in your house. And there's another app called Pin Drop, and that can detect things like smashing glass and sounds that would indicate that your house has been broken into, and then it would trigger a message to you. Hopefully you're not in the house.
Wow.
Wow.
So they go beyond human, like those microphones go beyond our own abilities to hear, and can go into greater spectrum there, and that allows new functionality between machines talking to machines.
Well, certainly, and I don't think anybody who's listening to this or watching should take this as this is what is happening, because I truly don't have a clue. But it had never occurred to me. Well, two things I've just learned. One is, okay, this device, which cost me nothing, because somebody got two of them after buying a whole lot of stuff at Woolworths, gave me one. So this is the Google device. I didn't realize there was an array of microphones and that it could pick direction. So that's interesting.
Well, the future is that you're going to have them all around the house, and this is where you get to the concept of ambient computing, where they're sitting. You've got screens with your TV has, there's one company that's working on linear arrays of microphones sitting across the top of your TV, but they need to work out which speaker you're talking to in the future, because you're going to have a lot of them, and it needs to work out which speaker should answer to you. So the models have to be able to work out which speaker the question is directed to.
You mean Google. Like, hey Google, speaker on the left of the TV instead of speaker on the right of the TV?
Yeah, or the bathroom, bedroom. If you say something, they've got to work out which one's supposed to answer and act on what you want.
Yeah,
which may be to get something to play on your TV, so it all or in your car, because they're all going to be connected.
Yeah, and I've got multiple Google speakers at home, and they know which room I'm in. And I can both of them can actually hear me. So when I give the OK Google command, both of them would respond. But when I say turn off the lights, it knows which room I'm actually in.
Oh, creepy.
That's cool.
And has it learned that, or have you had to go in and do a bit of if this, then that?
I had to put it in a little bit of settings. So it knows which lights are in the same room as which speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And so from there, when I go turn off the lights in the living room, it knows that I'm in the living room. Or it knows which lights belong to the living room group.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Yep.
Yeah. It's actually pertaining to Frank and Johan. You both have systems in place where if you detect silence, you've got an email or a warning signal sent to you to tell you there's silence. What's the potential for hackability of this in a Internet of Things landscape? Because I'd be interested to know what the countermeasures for people actually knowing that you have these systems in place and overriding them.
From my point of view, there is no hackability. My silence detector looks at what's going out to the transmitter. If it sees silence, and this is an actual physical connection, it then alerts the local security mob, and they ring me. You've been off air for 2 minutes.
That's probably because they were listening.
Yeah.
No. They
passionate
get
fans.
And it says, you've been off air for 2 minutes, so then I have to dial in and fix it.
Okay. Johan, what do you do about hacking?
Yeah. So we have a physical hardware-based silence detector up on the transmitter side. That's not really connected to the internet. The one that I have connected to the internet is a software-based one. So it lives on a Windows server or Windows-based server that is exposed to everything that Windows is exposed to.
Right.
Yep. If the server catches a cold, my silence detector might catch a cold along with it. Although because it is software-based, I can program it to do pretty much anything. So I could get it to wait 5 minutes and do something else.
Okay. I'd like to return to a term that Craig introduced just a little while ago, which is ambient computing, which might sound, very new agey and crystal like, but it is in fact a thing, and it's a term, and it refers to a way of approaching Internet of Things. So would you like to sort of tell a bit more about ambient computing?
Okay, well, yeah, with ambient computing, probably the best illustration is Star Trek. It's like you just talk to the ship wherever you are, and it knows, like we were talking about before, it knows where you are, so it knows which door to open. You can ask questions, you can tell it to do things. So your environment, the devices actually recede into the background. So these speakers, the microphones, they could be in the Internet of Things light bulbs. So some of those are coming with microphones. So it can pick up sound and then take action on it. So the devices that we have, the average of 17 devices in our home sort of start to recede, and we start just asking, show me the weather radar. What's the square root of 1,000,000? Set my calendar, start my car. And there's also the idea of persistence, where you get out of your car, you might have been listening to sport in your car. The system knows that you're listening to sport. You walk into your house and say, put it on my screen. So it's an encompassing environment where the computing is around you, and you're not actually necessarily directly interfacing with a device. You've just got computing that can help you, that understands your voice, gesture, and things like the cameras, which can detect in cars too. They can detect if you're just distracted while you're driving, and flash up coffee cups or turn on your automation system for driving in the future. So it's a persistent environment. So and it's just devices merging into the background, just like on Star Trek. So that's the goal. That's Google's goal.
At what point do we need to be scared that it's going to either make a decision that we wouldn't want made, or it's going to make the wrong decision based on the input that we give it?
Well, I guess you have to be scared when when something like that's going to make a big difference. Like the other week, went to the airport and I just told my phone, directions to the airport, and it said fine. And then it sent me a wrong way because it misinterpreted. I thought I was going to the airport. It thought I was going somewhere else. So that's a simple one.
Like a different airport, or
I didn't check. I was in too much stress. I threw the phone through the back of the car, and just went where I could see a sign saying airport, which wasn't where the phone was taking me. But it just misinterpreted something. I thought everything was fine, but it's when those decisions are going to make real differences in your life that you need to sort of double check them. But for most of it, it's going to be about media recommendations, or where's this restaurant, or there's going to be a lot of simple stuff before we get into the big stuff where there's real risk involved.
So coming back to our environment, how far are we from being able to trust the smart speaker in a studio with a speaker mute, by the way? So you can say, find me a Doobie Brothers track, rather than having to use a mouse and the keyboard. I mean, are any of the automation systems heading that way, Frank or Johan?
I would think that they're heading that way. It actually makes sense to do that. And with advances in voice recognition technology, it would do that. You've got to train it how to do that. But there's no reason why it can't do that. You're almost there already with smart speakers. I haven't played with a smart speaker. I was talking to Craig about it earlier, and I sort of said, is it worth buying a smart speaker? And he said, yes, definitely. Play with it and find out what it can do. And if that's the current way to go, I can see radio studios where announcers are sitting there saying, okay, hit play. Okay, ad break, turn the mic on and start talking. Mic off. I can see that coming. It sounds 2030, 2040, 2050. I think it'll happen within the next year or so.
I personally, I find that very scary.
Oh, yeah.
I find that
And-
very interesting. You could have a lot of opportunities for people in the RPH community to actually be able to interact more freely with the technology that we already have. So vision impaired people can actually, interface with the equipment better.
That's a good point. The scary point was when it first started with touch screens for announcers. That's the scariest thing I ever came across. Can you trust an announcer to touch a screen in the right point? You take it one step further, can you trust an announcer to say the right thing to your computer system?
Is that a matter of careful training?
Very
Either of the smart speaker or of the announcer.
Bit of both there, because like with what we know now, it's like you could build that. So like you go talk to a whole bunch of announcers and try and find out how they would say that, how they would want to say it. And you could build the system to then automate it, because that's voice as an interface. You then, if you've got your programmers, can go program that back end to interface with whatever systems it needs to and carry out quite a complex range of tasks and come back and give a response saying a confirmation. But then there is still always training and teaching people. I mean, that's why music's so popular. People sort of just know how to do that. Smart speakers and these assistants can do so much more, but it's very hard to teach people what they can do in a way that's reliable. There's some ideas about it being social being a big change, is that monkey see, monkey do sort of thing. You can, if you see someone else in your home, say, and this is why it's been potentially with older people, they can see younger people using it, and then they can learn the same way socially instead of having to read a manual or things like that. So yeah, no, don't know yet, but there's a few of those directions there that are really interesting, because when I first went into a lines room, it was the scariest place ever to try and patch all these things together. That I could think of nothing worse than that situation. So if you could work out the major things you could do by voice, that could make training a lot easier.
Come on, read a manual? Come on, we're off.
Well, and of course, that is one of the biggest trends, and I think that has come since the Apple iPhone, where essentially help went out the door and all apps had to be organized so that if anything you wanted to do should be really, really obvious. That requires a quite different way of thinking to the original days of personal computing, where there was always a help function and it would always open some sort of manual, vestigial or otherwise, to give you some instruction. I think we become now conditioned to not having a help function to give us guidance. And I don't even know how much help I would expect a smart speaker to give me, other than, I don't know that, please ask for something else.
Please
words to
Google
that
it.
effect.
I think we have a lot more resources available to us to help out with software and hardware nowadays. Like back then, we did not really have internet, and we had a little clippy in the little corner of Microsoft Office to help us out. Not the smartest guy, but now with Google, and we can just Google anything.
Yeah.
We can learn anything off Google and YouTube.
Okay, yes, absolutely true. Everybody, you're with the Technorama Tuesday webinar. We're discussing Internet of Things and related topics. We've got about 5 minutes left. If you've got a question you'd like to ask us, the chat window is there. Our bot is waiting to take your call. Oh, sorry, it's Hannah. And we'll pass on the question. We haven't had too many questions today. In fact, none, which is almost a record. So we're either making complete sense or we're talking crap. Both of course are possible. Craig, look, I'll just ask you quickly, the success of the news bot for the ABC, having done the programming, firstly, I did have 3 questions. How much load does this suddenly put on your infrastructure every day when you do the morning and afternoon blurt that you say people can get? So we'll just do that one quickly.
Well, yeah, nothing on our infrastructure because it's all hosted. So it's all hosted solutions. So it's nothing on our infrastructure.
Well, so when somebody says, "Oh, I want this information every morning. I want this information every afternoon," as you can do, do you only have to send one message? I mean, who's keeping track of all your users and their status?
Oh, that's the software we're using, which basically we're renting. It's subscription software, and then the rest of it's the Facebook. The Facebook platform handles all the send out of all those messages.
Okay.
So we did run into problems early on when we did the first Trump election. In that we had so much load that the Facebook system couldn't handle it. We got limited. But then we got increases on that rate. So yeah, there were some limitations there on that load. But yeah, most of the stuff now can be done through, say, Amazon AWS, Amazon Web Services, and things like that, where you're paying, you can pay quite a high amount when you've got high load. But for most things, it doesn't hit your own infrastructure.
Mm. Okay, and to be fair, this might it's all fee for service infrastructure in the cloud, and therefore just something that a community station can engage with or not based on budget.
That was really frank. All of our stuff's moving to the cloud. I mean, we had lots of infrastructure, and we get lots of load on things like our news site and things like that. But yeah, that's all moving to the cloud. It's still expensive, but just looking after all those machines and servers, and that's sort of a thing of the past.
And I think yes, Johan.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, even at SYN, we are a community station, and some of our network drives are moving to the cloud as well, moving over to Microsoft, because cost-wise, it is cheaper to maintain it up there than it is to maintain it on-site, and it's probably going to be a lot more reliable as well.
Okay. The second question I was going to ask Craig is, having built this infrastructure, coded or otherwise, how much resource does it take to maintain it? And how often do you hit a bug where, if you were a smaller organization, it might have caused you so much pain you'd wander away?
Well, if you're a smaller organization, like what we've done with the news spot's really broad. There's a lot of stuff in there, and we do a lot of special events in it. And people ask it a lot of things. So we're not doing everything at the moment. We're working on weather at the moment, and trialing a really conversational weather service in there. And we're looking at how to do emergencies through there for the country. But then we do special events like the moon landing. So there's a lot of stuff going on. We have an editorial team who are updating it every day, doing that morning alert, and then doing alerts through the day as well as our other systems like Apple News and our app, and doing a whole bunch of stuff around there. So they're always there. And then I did put on a role just to maintain the AI. So someone who was looking at what was coming through and seeing what it was matching and tweaking it. But the scale of our operation is so broad that we're in quite a sort of unique situation there. If you focus what you do and saying it just does these things, people get that, and if it doesn't work for something broader, that's fine. So yeah, if you can narrow down what your service does, the effort is a lot lower.
And how many users do you have at the moment?
At the moment, on a daily basis, it's around 130,000. We've had 2.5 million since we sort of started. A lot of those from around the world, or may have dropped off. But that's what they call reachable. We could send a message to about 2.2 million of them, but we never would, because we only send messages to people who've sort of asked us to. The rest of them have to sort of come into the bot if they want to. So yeah, it's what's that number? It's around 200,000 a week in there.
Okay.
But it's about the real gain of this is in that developing that trying to develop a relationship, which we're only really scratching the surface on so far. It's a bit like a news site at the moment where we're mostly pushing stuff, but the longer term goal is to have something that's a more two-way relationship.
Yeah, and the relationship with the listeners, and ultimately, I think this is what any radio station would want to do, which is maintain some contact with the people who are going to be your customers and be the people you most want to be able to quote when license renewal time comes around.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a great, the feedback we get that we can then use too about, and to improve what we do, but also the feedback we get is great. It's a really valuable source. And we do call outs a lot, and we use people in stories. So if we know, we'll send out about some of the issues, aged care. We've done things around I think wage negotiations, but we can get and then natural disasters. We can get a more diverse set of responses to that than other means. So a lot more different groups, which we can then use in stories to increase the diversity of the voices that you get to hear.
Okay. And so the final question that I want to ask you, you're coming from the big end of town, and it'd be very easy to say, yeah, well, that doesn't really apply to us. But the question is, does it? If, based on what you know about the resource of small organizations, is the sort of project that you've done the sort of thing that could be done by a small organization with limited amount of resource, or is it something that really takes lots of effort?
No, if you keep it small, if you keep it tight, you can totally do it. You can go get software. There's one company in America called Chatfuel, and there's others in Australia that provide software that you can plug in and then build your own bot. That'll increasingly become the case. And then if you can use that to decrease the load on people having to answer the phone for repeatable questions, and give you an option to have deeper contact with people to help solve their problems or questions, and build subscriber relationships. No, I think it's totally doable, and in fact, easier than what we've done, because of the expectations on what we would offer straight away were huge. But if you keep it tight, it's totally doable.
Yeah, and let me throw out an idea to everybody. Part of the requirements of the Broadcasting Services Act and the Code of Practice is that every time somebody calls your station to talk to you about your programming, you should actually be logging that. Well, how many of us do it? Because it's just hard. Is there a process that we could create which would enable that logging and the feedback from our customers, from our listeners, to happen automatically? And again, I say that is really the sort of evidence that you want when you're going for that grant, or when you're trying to justify the fact that your license should be renewed. So yeah, thank you. Great answer.
There's software like Airtable. There's new software that allows you to plug systems together. So you can go from your chatbot system to Airtable to something like Zendesk, or some type of management system for support or complaints. And then you can get back to people too. But yeah, there's more software now to enable you, like if this, then that, and things like that, that now allow you to connect machines to people systems and back again.
And what a great thought to finish on. Thank you so much for that, Craig. Hannah, I'm going to guess that the phone call came from
Johan.
Johan, who was saying his battery ran flat.
No, the laptop just froze. Internet of Things, just
the Internet of Things. So we're going to have
he's joining us again.
I think actually we've got to the end of the time, so we can thank him, and as he manages to come up in the next couple of seconds.
Yes.
So look, I would really like to thank our panel, Craig McCosker, Frank Wilcox, and Johan Lee. And I'd like to thank Hannah for being a great moderator and staying out of my way. And
mostly.
And I'd like to thank everybody who joined the broadcast and has stuck with us, which is great. Normally, you see people come on and go away. We've actually had a loyal audience through the entire discussion. And Johan coming back. Thank you very much, Johan, for A, joining us, B, leaving, and C, rejoining us. This is going to be rebroadcast, and a link will be up on the website. I'm going to say goodnight and throw to Hannah to explain all that.
Cool.
Technorama Tuesday will be back next month.
Excellent. Okay, well, like John basically did my entire job for me. Thank you, John. But thank you so much to John, Craig, Frank, and Johan for tonight's webinar. It's lots of food for thought, and especially coming from me for a small station, it's interesting to see how the Internet of Things will eventually impact our stations and actually become useful, hopefully. We'll see. But just before people head off for tonight, can I please ask that you make sure to fill out the feedback form at the end of the webinar? It really helps us to continually improve the content that we deliver and, of course, make it more relevant to your area of interest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and yes, like John said, keep tuned in for the next Technorama Tuesday webinar next month. And there'll be more information on that coming up on the CMTO website. And of course, the video of tonight's session will be up on YouTube, but also available on the CMTO website in the webinars section. So please make sure to, if you had friends that missed it, check it out and send it. And that's it. That's all I've got.
There we go.
But thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks,
and everybody, good
Thanks.
night.
Good
Bye.
night.